He set her badge on the counter like it was a verdict. Then he said, without looking up, "We're done. Collect your things and get out. And don't come back." Sadie Calloway stood in the middle of his kitchen in her coat and her work shoes, and the particular stillness of someone who has just been hit somewhere vital and hasn't figured out yet if she's bleeding. She had driven 40 minutes in October rain to tell him something. Something she'd been carrying for 3 weeks, something that had changed the shape of every morning since the test came back positive. She hadn't said it. She hadn't gotten the chance. He'd been talking before she even sat down. "I know what you did," he said. "I know about the files. I don't want explanations." And then the badge on the counter. "And get out." She picked it up. She set it back down. She walked to the door, and she did not look back, because she already knew what she would see. Nothing. She would be nothing to him the moment she crossed that threshold. He'd made sure of that in under 90 seconds. That was 3 years ago. 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. Not that she was counting, because she wasn't counting, because counting would mean she was still living inside something that was over. Tide's End, Maine was not the kind of town people moved to on purpose. You ended up there. A ferry to the mainland that ran twice a day in summer and once in winter. A harbor that smelled like diesel and cold salt. One pharmacy. One diner. One medical clinic that had been operating on reputation and stubbornness until doctor. Emil Hargrove finally, at 73, decided retirement wasn't the enemy. And until Sadie had arrived with her nurse practitioner license, a duffel bag, and a newborn who slept in a car seat in the supply closet during her first 3 shifts because she hadn't yet saved enough for the daycare deposit. She could afford it now. 3 years of knowing everyone's name, blood pressure, and Christmas tree allergy. 3 years of driving the 22-year-old pickup she'd bought off Emil for $800, and a promise to keep the clinic open through February. She'd built the practice from barely surviving to actually trusted, which in a town like Tide's End was the kind of reputation that took years and could not be faked. Jude was 3 years old, dark hair, brown eyes, the stubborn jaw of someone who had decided very early that the world was an interesting place that owed him information. He was enrolled at the Tide's End Early Learning Center on Marsh Road, where he had opinions about the sand table and a devoted, non-romantic relationship with a stuffed dog named Patch, who technically belonged to a girl named Ruby, but whom Jude had emotionally adopted, and Ruby generously shared. He had a blue toy car, small die-cast, a vintage muscle car shape with a tiny anchor engraved on the roof. He'd had it since before he could ask where it came from. Sadie had found it on the counter of the Boston apartment the morning after everything ended. She'd been packing in the dark, trying to be nothing at all, and she'd slipped it into her coat pocket without deciding to. It was Donovan's. One of those objects men like him accumulated in random places, a keychain charm, a desk trinket, something that had been in his pocket once, and migrated to the counter and stayed. She should have left it. She didn't. And now Jude carried it everywhere, the way children attached to objects that had weight they couldn't name. She was 45 minutes past closing on a Wednesday afternoon in October, trying to close out a billing chart when the door opened. She didn't look up immediately. The after-hours bell had a particular quality, and she'd learned to read it. Tourists who'd miscalculated their sunburn, fishermen with lacerations they'd been ignoring for 3 days. Once a man from the ferry who'd swallowed a fishhook in a way that required significant explanation. Then she looked up. Donovan Shea was standing in the doorway of her clinic in a dark coat, with his left hand pressed to his right side and the particular controlled expression of a man who had been trained to look fine even when he was the opposite of fine. He was older. Of course he was. So was she. There were lines at the corners of his eyes and something in the way he held himself that said he hadn't slept recently in any meaningful way. He looked at her across the waiting room. She looked at him. Her first coherent thought, and she would resent herself for this later, was that he'd lost weight. Her second thought was medical, protecting the right side, possible puncture, blood pressures probably dropped if he drove here. Her third thought was that she had not spent 3 years building this particular life in this particular town to have it come through her front door bleeding. The ER is 40 minutes by ferry, she said. Her voice was level. She'd worked very hard on level. You should go. I know where the ER is. His voice was the same. She'd hoped it would be different. Smaller, maybe. I'd rather not explain the paperwork. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she pointed at exam room 2. Sit down, she said. Don't touch anything. He had a gunshot wound, not deep. The bullet had grazed the muscle beneath his lower ribs rather than penetrating the cavity, which was the kind of luck that deserved its own category. But it needed cleaning, suturing, antibiotics, and 20 minutes of her time she most deeply resented giving him. She worked without speaking. He sat on the table and didn't flinch and didn't volunteer information, and she didn't ask. When she was done, she stripped her gloves and stepped back. There's a motel on Route 9, she said. Don't lift anything for 4 days. Come back if the suture line shows red tracking. Sadie. Don't. I'm not here because of you. He said it carefully, like he understood that choosing the wrong words right now had consequences. There's a port contract. Pemberton Maritime has been trying to acquire the Tides End Harbor access for 2 years. There's a meeting with the Harbor Authority tomorrow. I didn't know you were here. She looked at him for a long moment. She was trying to decide if that was true, and she had always been, to her considerable disadvantage, good at reading Donovan Shea. You need to leave, she said. The clinic closed 45 minutes ago. He left. The bell above the door rang. She stood in exam room 2 for 90 seconds with her hands flat on the counter, staring at her own reflection in the stainless steel surface until it resolved into something she recognized as herself. Then she cleaned the table, restocked the supplies, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to where Jude was asleep in the apartment above the clinic with the toy car on his nightstand and his boots on the wrong feet, which was how he'd fallen asleep because he'd refused to remove them until she agreed to read 2 chapters instead of 1. She stood in his doorway for a while. She didn't fall apart. She'd made herself a rule about that early on. Not in the clinic, not in front of Jude, not in places she needed to function, but she let herself feel the specific weight of what had just walked back through her life. Then she went to the kitchen and made tea she didn't drink and sat at the table until the harbor lights went quiet. He came back the next morning at 7:15. She knew it was him before she looked up, which irritated her, because she'd trained herself out of that particular reflex years ago, and apparently one day was enough for it to return. He sat in the waiting room chair. She finished what she was doing. Then she came to the reception window. You should be resting. I've been resting. He looked at her directly. I want to explain what happened 3 years ago, what actually happened. I've been fine without the explanation. I know that, he said. I'm asking you to hear it anyway. She looked at him for a long moment. She had a full morning scheduled and no patients, and a man sitting in her waiting room who had demolished her life and then shown up bleeding and was asking for something she hadn't decided yet to give. 30 minutes, she said. Then I have patience. She made coffee because it gave her hands something to do. She brought him a cup black without asking, noticed it immediately, resented it, because some muscle memory was apparently impervious to 3 years of deliberate forgetting. Someone told me you'd copied files, he said. Records from the port contracts, shipping manifests, documentation that, in the wrong hands, would have opened a federal investigation into the entire Boston operation. He wrapped both hands around the mug. I was told you were going to take them to the DA's office. Sadie stared at him. Who told you that? Noel Ferris. The name landed in a specific place. Noel Ferris had been Donovan's director of communications, a generous title for what she actually managed. And she had been, for about 8 months, the closest thing to a friend Sadie had made inside that world. They'd had lunch twice. She'd come to Sadie's birthday. Sadie had lent her a novel she never got back. She was there when I came home that night, Sadie said slowly. She was already in your office. Yes. She'd already told you. Before you walked in the door. Sadie sat down. She hadn't planned to sit. She'd planned to maintain the structural advantage of standing. But her legs had made a different decision. I never touched those files, she said. I didn't know where they were kept. I didn't know what was in them. I had access to the apartment and the car and a standing reservation at a restaurant I didn't even like. That was the extent of what I was allowed inside that operation. She could hear her own voice, how flat it was, not cold, just finished with the process of being hurt by this particular thing, because she'd finished that process a long time ago in a Portland sublet with a newborn and no one to call. I know, he said. The two words were so quiet she almost missed them. You know now, she said. What changed? Noelle was arrested 8 months ago. Federal investigation into Pemberton Maritime. She'd been feeding information to Pemberton's people for 14 months. Her job with me was cover. She was placed there specifically to create instability. He looked at Sadie directly. The story about the files. She fabricated it. The silence stretched. Outside the harbor was doing what it did in October, gray and flat and patient. You didn't ask me, Sadie said. No. You didn't ask me if it was true. You just believed her. He held her gaze. Yes. That's worse than the accusation. She said it without raising her voice, because the rage she'd had 3 years to process had become something more precise and far more load-bearing than volume. I would have told you. I would have shown you everything. I would have let you go through my phone, my email, my entire life, because I had nothing to hide and I knew it. But you didn't ask. You handed me my badge and told me to leave. She looked at him steadily. That's what I've been carrying. Not the accusation. The fact that you didn't think I was worth 30 seconds of asking. He didn't deflect. She'd expected him to. The Donovan she'd known had been extraordinary at moving conversations to higher ground before anything real could reach him. But this version sat with it. Let it land. His jaw tightened and he looked down at the mug and didn't say anything for a moment. You're right, he said. I know I am. I'm not saying it to agree with you. I'm saying it because it's true and because I have to say it out loud, or none of the rest of this means anything. The door at the back of the clinic opened and Jude came out. He did this sometimes when he woke early, padded down the interior stairs in his socks, holding the blue toy car, and appeared in the clinic with the absolute ownership of someone who had never once questioned his right to every room in the building. He stopped when he saw Donovan. He was not startled. He tilted his head slightly to the left, which was his primary data collection posture, and examined the stranger with the unhurried attention of a 3-year-old who had decided this was interesting. Your watch has a boat on it, Jude said. Donovan looked at him. Something moved across his face that he didn't have full control over, not recognition yet, but the reflexive attention of someone unused to being directly addressed by small people. It does, he said. You like boats? My car has an anchor. Jude held up the blue toy car. Anchors are for boats. Donovan looked at the toy car. Sadie watched him look at it. She watched very carefully, with the specific attention of someone reading the space between words, and she saw exactly when he recognized it, the slight stillness, the way his hands tightened around the mug in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee. He looked up at her. She kept her face exactly where it was. I'm Jude, Jude said, because introductions apparently followed anchor boat logic in his worldview. I'm 3. I go to Miss Petra's class. He considered the man again. You look like you didn't sleep. I didn't, Donovan said. Not really. Mom says sleep is not optional. Jude told him with the clinical certainty of someone delivering established medical fact. He held out the toy car and rolled it across the waiting room table. It traveled in a straight line and stopped at the edge. He nodded, satisfied. It still goes straight, he told Donovan. I check it every day. That's a good system, Donovan said. Jude picked the car back up and looked at him once more, the evaluating tilt, the data gathered and filed, and apparently decided he passed some internal standard. He went back through the door without ceremony. Donovan was looking at the empty doorway. How old? He said, and stopped. His voice had lost its professional surface, something underneath it that she hadn't heard before, or had only heard in moments he hadn't known she was watching. Is he? Yes, she said. She wasn't going to make him finish it. It was a kindness she was giving herself, not him. He's yours. He exhaled, slowly, all at once, like something he'd been holding since the moment the toy car crossed that table. He stared at the wall. She watched his face work through something that was not performance, was not calculation, purely the arithmetic of a man understanding what 3 years and 4 months actually contained. I was going to tell you that night, Sadie said. Her voice stayed level. It cost her something to keep it there, and the cost was showing somewhere beneath the surface, but she'd hold the surface even if it killed her. I was 3 weeks along. I'd made an appointment. I'd planned what I was going to say. And then I came home, and Noelle was already there, and you had my badge in your hand. He closed his eyes 1 second too. Sadie. I'm not finished. She'd rehearsed this conversation in her head 100 times, every version measured and deliberate and surgical. What was actually coming out was something older and more honest than rehearsal. You said don't come back, so I didn't. I went to Portland. I worked double shifts at an urgent care for 8 months. I found this town and I found this building, and I built this clinic from a practice that had 3 patients a week and a mold problem in the back bathroom. I did all of it alone. Not because I was too proud to ask for help, because there was no one to ask. Her hands were flat on the counter. She was watching them. Jude was born in February. 6 pounds, 11 ounces. He screamed from the first second and hasn't really stopped since. There was a nurse named Gertrude who held my hand during the hard part and hummed something under her breath. That was everyone in the room. He was very still. He took his first steps in this kitchen, she said. He said his first word, which was more, which I'm certain surprises no one. He had a fever of 103 when he was 14 months old, and I sat up with him 2 nights straight with a cold cloth on his forehead because I was terrified and exhausted, and I'm a medical professional, and I was still terrified. She looked at him directly. That's what you missed. Not a child in the abstract. 3 years and 4 months of specific, exhausting, daily, impossible things. He didn't answer right away. He sat with it the way she'd needed him to sit with it. Then he said, quietly, what would it take to earn the right to not miss the next part? It wasn't quite a question, more like a statement that had decided to be humble about itself. She opened her mouth, closed it. She hadn't expected this, had expected anger or justification or the smooth operational composure that had always been his first language. Not this. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I haven't figured that out. He nodded, like that was an acceptable answer, like he'd already decided, without negotiating, that waiting was what the situation required. From upstairs came the sound of Jude's boots hitting the floor, followed by the focused displeasure of someone discovering that the world had continued being uncooperative about the left one. The envelope appeared in the clinic's mail slot on Friday morning, mixed in with a pharmaceutical catalog and a Harbor Authority notice. Her name on the front, block letters printed too carefully, the handwriting of someone disguising their handwriting. Inside was a photograph. Jude at the Learning Center on Marsh Road, standing near the wooden play structure during outdoor time, holding the blue car up to show Ruby something. Laughing, taken from outside the chain-link fence on the east side of the property, where the street parking lot backed up against the schoolyard. Sadie sat down on the floor behind the reception desk, not because her legs gave out. She chose to sit. She put her back against the cabinet and held the photograph face down and breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The method her OB's therapist had given her when Jude was 6 weeks old, and she'd been running on negative sleep and something close to the edge of something she refused to name. Someone had been standing outside her son's daycare, photographing him through a fence. She sat there for 4 minutes. She counted them on the clock above the waiting room door. Then she stood up, put the envelope in the pocket of her scrubs, and opened the clinic. She called Donovan at 8:15. He answered on the first ring. "Come to the clinic," she said, "now." He was there in 8 minutes. She set the photograph on the reception desk between them without context. She watched his face. She needed to see it with her own eyes, whether what crossed his expression was surprise or recognition. It was surprise, followed immediately by something that hardened his eyes in a way she hadn't seen before. Something operational, the part of him she'd always known existed and had never been directly confronted with. "When did you find this?" he said. His voice had gone flat in a specific way. "This morning." She said it before he could tell her not to. "And I'm calling the police." "Sadie." "No." She kept her voice low because a patient was in the waiting room. "Someone photographed my son through a fence and put the picture in my mailbox. I'm calling the police. But first you're going to tell me what this is." He looked at the photograph, then at her. "Pemberton," he said, "or someone working for him. He knows I've been coming here. This is a message. It says we see what matters to you." "My son is 3 years old," she said. "He still needs help with his boots. Don't stand in my clinic and explain to me what messages mean." She met his eyes. "You brought this here. When you came through that door on Wednesday with your gunshot wound and your port contract, you brought this to Tide's End, to Jude's school." She let the words land and stay. "So you're going to tell me exactly how you're going to fix it." He held her gaze. Something shifted in his posture, not defensive, not retreating. The stance of someone who has decided to absorb what's coming rather than deflect it. "I need to go to Boston," he said, "to Pemberton directly, on his ground. That changes the dynamic. It says I'm not running and I'm not distracted. And between now and when you get there, what happens to Jude? I have 2 people in town. They've been here since Wednesday." He said it before she could ask. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You should know. They're watching for anyone watching me. One of them flagged a car on Harbor Road 2 days ago." He paused. "Jude doesn't go to daycare today. He stays here with you. And I'll call you every 90 minutes until this is done." She called the Tide's End police non-emergency line and reported a stranger photographing children through the school fence. The dispatcher, a woman named Colleen, who bought her blood pressure medication from the clinic pharmacy, to cook it with methodical seriousness. They'd send someone to the school. Donovan left on the noon ferry. He called at 1:30, at 3, at 4:45. Brief, factual, no performance. She hadn't asked him to call at 90-minute intervals. He did it anyway. She didn't tell him to stop. Jude spent the afternoon at the clinic table drawing boats. He had grown particular about their rigging. He didn't ask why he wasn't at school. He asked once, in the careful manner of someone who understood the question, had weight, whether Donovan was coming back. "I don't know yet," Sadie said. Jude considered this with the pragmatic patience of a child who had learned that some questions had timelines. His watch had a good anchor, he said, and returned to his boats. At 9:40 that night, Donovan called. He had met with Pemberton at a restaurant in the Seaport district. 2 hours, 30 minutes. "It's done," he said. His voice had changed from the morning, not lighter, but settled. Pemberton's issue was never Jude. It was leverage. He needed to demonstrate I had something he could reach. I made it clear that his method of demonstrating it had created more instability for both of us than the contract dispute itself. He paused. I also told him that any further contact with you or Jude, specifically, would be treated as a declaration. He understood what that meant. Did he believe you? He's a practical man. The cost-benefit changed. Another pause. Noelle was the original contact point. She'd been feeding Pemberton information for 14 months, including where you'd gone and what you'd built here. He knew about Jude before I did. Sadie stood at the back window, looking at the harbor lights. The boats were dark shapes on black water. "Fix that too," she said, "whatever that requires." Already in motion. "Come back," she said. It was the simplest thing she'd said to him in 3 years. "Morning ferry," he said, 7:15. He was on it. Jude, who had developed the ferry schedule as an area of personal interest, announced at 6:50 that the first boat was coming and could they watch from the clinic window. They did. Jude pressed his hand against the cold glass. Somewhere on the water was the ferry that was bringing someone back, and Sadie stood behind her son with her coffee going cold and watched the harbor and thought about all the things that had been set in motion and all the things she didn't have words for yet. Donovan came through the clinic door at 8. Jude looked up from the table. "You came back," Jude said. This was his standard greeting for people he'd decided to track, delivered with the mild approval of someone confirming a fact they'd been open-minded about. "I said I would." Jude slid off the stool and walked to him and held up the toy car. "I checked it this morning," he said, still straight. Donovan looked at the car for a moment. Then he crouched down to Jude's eye level, carefully, protecting the sutured side, and looked at it properly. "Good," he said. "That means it's reliable." Jude absorbed this. "Reliable is important," he confirmed, and walked back to his boats. Sadie made coffee. She moved around the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of 3 years of exactly this, and she was aware, at a low hum below the ordinary surface of the morning, that the shape of things had changed. Not broken. Changed in the specific way that happens when a door you've kept locked for a long time gets opened and the air in the room shifts, and you realize the lock had been costing you something too. She set a mug on the counter for him without asking. He looked up when she did. She looked back. The custody agreement was filed 6 weeks later through a family law attorney in Portland named Gloria, who had been recommended by Emil's former office manager and who described her specialty as making sure the child is the actual point. Donovan's attorney responded within 48 hours. 3 minor modifications, all logistical. Gloria called them the most professionally reasonable counterproposals she'd received in 11 years. Sadie read the final document 3 times the night she signed it. The clause she'd asked Gloria to include, that Jude's primary residence was Tide's End, that the clinic was home, that no relocation would occur without mutual agreement and court approval, was there, clean and uncontested. She closed the laptop. She looked at the harbor through the kitchen window. She felt something shift in her chest that wasn't relief exactly, but was adjacent to it. The specific sensation of having carried weight for so long you've stopped noticing it's there, and then you set it down, and your body doesn't know what to do with the absence. December came with snow and the cold that made the harbor go quiet. Donovan came every weekend. He stayed at the motel on Route 9 for the first 2 weeks. The 3rd week, Jude announced at dinner, with the flat authority of someone making a logistical observation, that the motel was far and cold, and also Donovan hadn't seen Thursday's boat drawings. "There is an extra room," Sadie said. Donovan came in on Friday and left on Sunday and called when he landed, which she hadn't asked for. He texted Monday mornings. He was on the 7:15 ferry every Friday without having to be reminded. Jude turned 4 in February. Sadie made a vanilla cake. Jude had strong opinions about vanilla being the correct choice and had explained these at length to everyone in the clinic, including the pharmaceutical rep who hadn't asked, and she decorated it with a boat because Jude's boat interest had deepened from a phase into something approaching a professional commitment. Emil came in his fishing sweater. Mrs. Burnett came and brought a card with a lobster on it. 2 daycare friends came with their parents. Ruby came and Patch came with her. Donovan was there. He sat at the end of the table and didn't look anywhere else in the room when Jude was talking. When it was time for the candles, Jude counted them twice to be certain. Donovan reached into his coat pocket and set something on the table beside the cake. A wooden boat, small, handmade, sanded smooth with a tiny anchor painted on the hull. Not a replica of anything, just a boat someone had made carefully. Jude picked it up. He held it and the blue card together in both hands and looked at them side by side with the focused comparative analysis of a person conducting quality control. "The anchor matches," he said. "I noticed yours had one," Donovan said. Jude examined them a moment longer. Then he set both objects carefully on the table beside his cake plate, the car and the boat together, and stepped back to assess the arrangement with the expression of someone confirming a curatorial decision. "The boat goes first," he said. "The car protects the back. That's the right order." No one had asked. He stated it as information the room clearly needed, and then he looked at the candles. "Can I make 2 wishes?" he asked, "one for each." "That's not usually how it works," Sadie said. Jude looked at Donovan. Donovan looked at Jude. "I think it's your birthday," Donovan said. "I think today you make the rules." Jude received this legal interpretation as sound, nodded once, and took a breath large enough for someone twice his size. He looked at the 4 candles. He looked at the boat. He looked at the car. He blew them all out in one breath, and everyone in the clinic clapped, and the February light came through the frost-edged windows the way it always did, thin and honest and entirely itself, and the harbor was out there doing what it had always done. And the room smelled like vanilla cake and the warmth of a building that had people in it who meant to stay. Later, after the guests had gone, and Jude was drowsing on the window seat with the boat tucked under one arm and the car in his open hand, the clinic went quiet in the particular way it got quiet when the day had finished what it came to do. Donovan was at the counter. Sadie was at the other end, not talking, just in the same room, which had stopped requiring commentary. "He didn't tell you his wishes," Donovan said. "He never will," she said. "That's the one rule he keeps absolutely. That's a good quality. He has a lot of them," she said it simply, just the truth of it, stated without performance. He looked at her across the clinic. She let herself look back, not managing what it meant, not measuring what she was giving by looking, just looking, the way you sometimes looked at something that had been through a long, hard winter and was still standing. "Thank you," he said. "It was very quiet, for bringing him here, for all of it." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I know. I did it because he was already himself, 3 weeks in, and I wasn't going to take that away because you made a bad decision about who to believe." She looked at the window seat, at her son asleep, with his boat and his car and his absolute certainty about the correct order of things. "But I'm glad he knows you. I'm glad you know him." Donovan didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. From the window seat, without opening his eyes, Jude said, "I heard that." Neither adult answered. Jude made a small, satisfied sound and pulled the toy boat a little closer and stayed exactly where he was. The harbor light moving through the window in slow winter bars, the boat in front, the car behind, everything arranged in the order that made sense to him and no one else, and that was, for now, exactly enough.